are having an impact on the audience. I had a full presentation that I was going to talk to, but I'm just going to throw that out the window actually, because I think you all know what NZTE does and who we are. And in a nutshell, we only do two things, and that's build businesses' capability to export and to go international successfully. So build capability and then be competitive in the market, and that's all we do. How we do it gets a little bit more complicated, but essentially that is what we do. So if I park the presentation and the thoughts to one side and just pivot a little bit, we just finished an analysis of about 200 odd co-investments that we've made with businesses over the last 5 or 6 years. Fortunately, they preceded COVID, but they do include COVID as well. The net results of that analysis threw up three or four quite interesting things. And it's interesting when you sort of sit there and read them and go, we know this stuff, but somehow we haven't baked it into our own processes and psyche. And we certainly haven't communicated it well enough with business. I just look at Baldwin and Boyle when I think of communication and how we do that. But the first thing that came out of that study was there's not enough analysis, assessment and validation being done of markets before businesses leave New Zealand. And for an agency like NZTE, whose bread and butter is market selection, market analysis, channel and customer validation, there's something not quite working right for businesses to keep coming back to us and saying over the course of 4 or 5 years that they need to be doing more market analysis, market selection and validation. The second thing that came out of it was, and this is feedback from businesses, was that the cost of marketing and the amount of investment into marketing was undercooked. And I recall a conversation I had the other day with a business who came to me and said, and has come to me, and we've got a meeting at the end of the month, I've got $20,000 to invest in America. And what the American team has been telling me that $20,000 is the cost per month of investment in a digital light touch approach to the market. So we're undercooked by about a factor of 10. And that's feedback from businesses, and that's feedback from our own business development people on the market. And yet again, we're sitting here letting businesses go to market without checking the investment and the funding that they have for marketing. So that was the second thing that came out of it. The third thing that came out of it was that success is often premedicated on having a person in the market. And there's obviously a huge cost to that as well, which is why it's good to have the money people sitting to my left. But if people in market is a predeterminer of success, then how do we bake that into one of the first things that businesses do when they go offshore? And then there was a whole bunch of smaller things that sort of came after that. But analyse the markets, market and grow awareness, and have someone that actually knows your business and cares about you in the marketplace to keep everyone else honest. You know, I think that that's the sort of stuff that NZTE needs to do more of and take more care of. And that's the feedback that we're getting back from customers about what matters and what counts. So yeah, I think that's, you know, we could stray into supply chain and traceability and verification and risk matrices and success factors and all sorts of other things, but I think I'll just leave that for open Q&A. But I think that analysis of those co-investments over the last 4 or 5 years really bring back what NZTE need to do to be successful and what they need to do in New Zealand and do internationally to make sure that businesses are competitive and able to grow in the markets. So yeah, that's me, Mr. Chair.
Is that your presentation today?
That's it. Oh, yeah.
Well, I had a whole sort of agenda here where, you know, I was going to introduce all of you and say a bit about you, but all and then launch into Craig's.
With those opening words, then you can stray into the rest of your questions.
I have to ask the questions and relax.
And draw the rest of it out.
Yeah. And anyway, but by the way, we've got, as you see, we've strategically placed everyone in the right position so you can see who they are. I must admit, some of the photos may have been your first job, Bill.
I'm young and happy in that.
Update of it, yeah. So it's very useful.
I've got to see you next time as well.
But I was obviously we didn't really give an introduction. Well, my name's Paul Gestro, so I'm international trade consultant at ASB Bank. I've got the easy job of just moderating this panel of experts. We underestimated Craig's. We didn't really talk about Craig's background. If you know anything about food and beverage, consumer goods, Craig's the guy to talk to. Very well networked across the country and the community. Leads the director of customers for food, beverage, and consumer goods. Is that right? Yeah. Food, beverage, consumer goods. It changes.
It does change, but that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah, which is great, but also a number of government panels on looking to grow that sector as well. Lucia Trandafir, is that right? Yeah, obviously with TradeWindow, runs the academy there at TradeWindow. Previously with Fonterra for about 18 years, I think. So you know a little bit about trade documentation and things we would consider, a lot of flow through that organisation. And obviously from ourselves as ASB Bank, we partner with TradeWindow because we see digital trade as a way forward for exporters and importers alike as well. So do a lot of work with TradeWindow, of course. And yeah, the big thing about digital trade is around, there's around about a single trade transaction just can generate a whole bunch of paper, basically, a whole bunch of transactions, lots of paper documents, and about 5,000 data field exchanges through the mix. So something has to be digitised. Many organisations and companies just haven't got to that stage yet. So we're excited to see the progress of TradeWindow. My colleague Mike Atkins from ASB Bank is working now, used to be head of the trade finance team at ASB Bank, is now working very closely with TradeWindow on that digitalisation journey, and of course how it works with us and how we interact with our clients from a digital perspective. So very exciting work done there. We'll cover that a bit later. I won't talk about these two gentlemen, how long they've been in the finance kind of industry. And of course we've got Phil here, Phil Quin is the Senior Business Originator at NZ Export Credit. And we work very closely with Phil and the team there on with our export customers as well. But we'll jump into, they'll talk about some different parts of their areas of expertise in a moment. But I'll hand over to Lucia to just talk a bit about TradeWindow and some of the work you're doing there.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So as today we are talking about exports, you all know that moving the goods, the physical movement of the goods through crossing the borders cannot be done without the movement of the data. So that's why we are talking about export documentation practically containing data that reflects the details of the transaction. So the current issue in the export industry is the disconnected, time-consuming, paper-based type of process, relying on people to manually create documentation, process them, and keep a track of all the requirements that are needed, regulatory requirements that you need to take care of when you are producing the export documentation. This is pretty much exhausting, and it is prone to human errors, and we all know how much that costs us as an exporter. And on the other hand, managing a process documentation does require specific knowledge and expertise that it's not easy found on the market at times. As Paul said, a list of the documents for a transaction could be huge. Sometimes you have 20 paper documents to issue and need the data elements is in thousands that you need to move that data through the participants in the trade, in the whole process. Multiple entities that you need to deal with in a transaction, not only the importer and exporter, but could be suppliers, could be logistic providers. There are customs authorities, other regulatory bodies that you need to contact. So all of this create a level of complexity that the companies are trying to elevate using the digital solution that will help them to manage easier this complexity and especially the compliance on the export industry, because compliance is a very important bit of processing export documentation, and the number of documents, the type of data that you require to have on the documents is really very much driven by the exporting country requirements on one hand, then the destination country requirements on the other hand, and then the product, the goods that you are exporting, because there are specific regulations that you need to really take care of when you are exporting goods. Another element is the time, because in the exporting process, you have due dates, you have deadlines. You need to share the information at a particular time in the process between some parties. And it's always something that people at this point in time are doing it, spending a lot of time in making sure that all the information is correctly and in time that way. So organizations definitely are looking for a better solution. Most of them are trying to find a digital solution which implied that will have they will be able to grow easily. They will be able to manage the compliance, the regulatory compliance much easier, and access markets, new markets easier, as well facilitated payment and the cross-border collaboration. There are such solutions. Export documentation preparation solution is something that can help with this activity. And TradeWindow does have a solution or tool like that, a system called Product, which has been practically built to automate the production of the export documentation and managing the compliance requirements. So this system does simplify and streamline the workload required on the whole process, eliminate paper-based, time-consuming type of activities, and as well increasing accuracy on the documents, which is absolutely important in the whole process, and increasing the productivity of the whole export documentation and export as a whole, export process as a whole. How Product does that, there are a number of tools and a number of functionality that Product has. And after our discussion today, I will take you, if you are interested, to walk in through the system to see how the system look like in the first place, how it operates, and what it can do for you practically. Product is not a new tool on the market. It is currently used by multiple exporters in New Zealand, exporting various products from, food and beverage, dairy, meat, seafood, timber, you name it. Any product, any exporting industry can use this tool. And something else that TradeWindow does is helping with increasing the team capability on the export documentation, and specifically through our academy. We have e-learnings with international trade knowledge that people can dig in, and as well we have export documentation programs that we are currently running that you are more than welcome to ask about. So yeah, see you at my practical walkthrough to the system later on.
Good.
Thank you.
I got 4 questions just out of that.
You will have to wait for that.
Yeah.
It's not about you.
So hurry up.
No, you can ask your
Let's
questions.
just pick a presentation short. We'll wait at the end, and of course, we're hoping everyone else is going to have lots of questions as well. We'll work through the panel anyway, and we'll get through sort of main topics, and we'll take it from there. So going from sort of expertise, helping you and get into market, to the digital platforms to really make things more efficient, and then you may need some money to do it, and Mike's your man. So Mike, I'll let you talk about the journey, obviously, maybe with TradeWindow as well, and why we're interested in working with TradeWindow from a perspective, and everything else. Shall I talk about it?
Yeah, maybe I'll cover the banking bit first.
Good.
Look, Ian, no need to write notes. I'm happy to share my notes, I guess, through ours, etc. But look, world of finance and payments is an absorbing topic itself. I wanted to keep it brief and just talk about 5 key messages. If you can remember them all at the end, I think there's a prize. Yeah, great.
Is it?
Is it
You're making
2% reduction in
about
2% reduction in the
Yeah.
finance rate?
So look, number one, have clarity around purpose and source of finance. So what is the best fit? Look, it may be just trade finance on a shipment by shipment basis, or it could actually be more efficiently wrapped as short-term debt or potentially capital equity injection if you're undertaking a multi-year export program with an existing buyer or a new market. Okay, so think about purpose and the source. Just like you would with your NZTE colleagues, tell your story. There's time with your bank to help them understand your business, your ambition, your strategic attention. And we're experts in the field and have a back catalogue of good, the bad, and the ugly. And quite happy to share those with you. Not from a scare, not to scare people, but just from an education point of view. 3, understand your cycles. And I don't mean your personal cycles, I'm talking about cash conversion and your trade cycle. So trade cycle being the number of days supply through production to receipt of your export sale proceeds. Cash conversion, the number of days from payment for inventory to receipt of sales proceeds. Sharing this data with the bank drives confidence and performance and execution. And that's what we want, right? Are people working together for a common goal or for the common good? It'll help the bank understand what risk it's funding and the source of repayment. 4th, use a sales contract. Might sound like a bit of an overworn strategy, but you want to be able to protect your hard work and your investment. Think about what would be the impact of non-payment or the loss of the contract. Use this document to set your payment expectations as well. No record can lead to no hope of recovery when it all goes wrong in some cases. And 5, be clear on your risk appetite for non-payment. This will drive your choice of payment terms and methods. I'll put that in perspective. If we look at the risk continuum from low to high, prepayment is typically in advance of shipment. You'd use this for a first-time buyer or an unknown, unproven trading relationship, or you hold power in the relationship. High product demand, relatively scarce product. So you might just be small, but if you hold the power, then you can dictate the terms. You'll be surprised some foreign buyers will actually pay in New Zealand dollars if no other choice. The buyer carries the risk of non-delivery. That's how they'll look at you if they've given up your money from the start. The flip side of that is open account. Typically you use that where there's an established trading pattern, trusted buyer relationship, against sight of shipping documents, or you can use it to provide credit terms. However, you as the exporter carry the risk of buyer default and potentially the loss of goods. Alternatively, you can use the banking system to reduce risk. So let's just explore a couple of common methods there without getting too technical. Documentary collection. So the documents that Lucia referred to, the bank acts as your agent to collect the proceeds from the buyer. Use of submit a bill of exchange as evidence of debt along with export documents. So you've got a legal document. There's legal precedents set from the Bill of Exchange Act 1908. So that delivers comfort to you as an exporter. However, you still carry the risk of buyer default, but you can protect the loss of goods. And that the bank shouldn't release documents to pick up the goods until there's a commitment to pay. And then finally, a documentary letter of credit, colloquially known as an LC, used to replace the buyer, use that to replace buyer risk with the bank risk. Significantly diminishes your payment risk. In simple terms, it's a quasi-guarantee from a buyer's bank to pay upon presentation of compliant export documentation. Also a negotiable instrument which supports credit terms and or cash flow acceleration. It's governed by a uniform set of rules under the International Chamber of Commerce and has legal precedence. From a buyer's position, it enables the provision of more credit. More credit means more purchases generally and more profit for you as the exporter. From a seller perspective, access to cash flow upon shipment through the discounting process, or in simple terms, submission of your export documentation to the bank. Finally, trade credit insurance provides protection against buyer non-payment and fills the just-in-case scenario. A great backstop to have, but also a great place for me to stop. I'll hand over to Phil to tell you more about these options and other solutions that they might have in the Export Credit Office. But before I do, can you remember the 5 things? No. Was anybody listening? Can you remember one of them? You told not to write it down, so
you didn't share the presentation.
Well,
listening to one thing.
The great thing is there is a all your banks can help you with this. So
yeah,
while it does sound confusing, if you talk to the bank, we'll give you the rundown. What they probably step by step.
You had me at if you need money. I wrote that down. If you need money to do it, and I put that in. Yeah. So that's one key message, right?
Yeah.
All Craig wants is a reduced interest rate. That's
That wasn't 2%, it was 2% points. Just in case.
There are a couple of tiny little one pages that I know we have, which kind of outlines all those different scenarios, which actually, when you look at it, looks quite simple. But, you know, obviously there's a lot of terminology. I heard the word risk mentioned probably about 10 times. So, but we work with banks, so that's what we talk about a lot is risk.
Well, Craig started there with risk.
Yeah. But speaking of more risk, and part of even banks want to mitigate their risk. You know, that's why we work with NZ Export Credit, is because they come along and help us out, help the exporter out with going into some markets that can be a little bit more trickier, some terms that could be a little bit harder. So, you know, it's great to work closely with NZ Export Credit because we can get some of these transactions across the line, which we never normally would, which means the export can go ahead and their business. So I'll let you
Sure, I think
explain all that. Send me times you can not mention risk.
Yeah, I did it without mentioning risk. This is going to be good. Okay. They always make me go last. I don't know why that is actually. But anyway. So I don't know. New Zealand Export Credit, we're New Zealand Export Credit Agency. Nothing unusual in that. Every country has one, right? So it's nothing unusual in itself. We're part of Treasury, so surprise you might be that this function exists within New Zealand Treasury. So we exist entirely for exporters, right? And not just exporters, but exporter supply chain. So even if you're not a direct exporter, if you're part of an exporter supply chain, everything I talk about is in scope as well. One of our closest partners actually is NZTE. NZTE gets into markets. We come into play when there's risk in those markets, and there's risk you can't afford to take. This one?
There's two actually. Two risks.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Don't worry about it. Let's go.
It's not about my game. We essentially enable you to do 3 things. We help you manage the risk, write that one down. That's the 3rd time I mentioned it, right? We've managed risk, help our product to help you access finance, and it can also help you secure your sales as well. So essentially what we do is we do 2 things. If you go into market and you've got buyer risk that you cannot afford to take, you're actually your end buyers are asking you for repayment terms, 30, 60, 90, 180 days, whatever the terms are to pay for it. If you can't afford not to get paid, you need trade credit insurance. And basically what that does, it covers you in the risk that if your buyers don't pay you if they go into liquidation or they decide to change their mind, or there might be some political event, it covers those receivables, right? It won't cover all of it, up to 70, 80% of it. It gives you confidence to go on there, offer those terms to your buyer, particularly if you go into a new market or a buyer you haven't worked with before, and it's too big to walk away from. If you do walk away from it, someone else is going to get that contract. And having trade credit insurance will actually give you the confidence to actually be able to transact and offer those terms. So that's where we take buyer risk. The other thing we do is Mike alluded to and Paul as well, is we can provide guarantees to banks. So the bank to provide a facility on your behalf.
So it might be your security contract. You need to go to your bank, get an increase in facilities. It might be beyond their appetite. You might need more security. They might believe in you, but you just need that extra bricks and mortar security or some cash collateral, and you don't have any more security to give. But the transaction makes sense. We can step in as a guarantor to the bank, so effectively become that security on your behalf. So if in the event that, and then enable them to do that transaction, so to enable them to have the confidence for you to scale it, go into that transaction, and in the event that goes wrong, that guarantee gets called on, and we can seek recourse, but it enables you to sort of scale up and get into a transaction that otherwise you might have to walk away from because you didn't have sufficient security. So two things, underwriting your buyer risk when you go into markets, particularly if it's new markets, and the other thing is those guarantees. So think to yourself, have you got, if there's three questions you're going to ask yourself, how do I manage my cash flow? What do I do if I don't get, am I covered if I don't get paid? And if you ask yourself, how do I scale up for growth? If you ask yourself those three questions, those sort of things we can help cover. Our products can help cover all those three questions for you. Important to note too that we complement the private sector, so we're going to be invited in. So in terms of that trade credit insurance, there's other providers. There's a Traders Coface, you'll hear me as QBE. We get invited in when the private sector can't do it. We'll cover those reasons later on. And likewise with the guarantees, we get involved when the bank invites us in as well. They might think, look, we believe in this customer, but we need your help to risk share on this up to a point as well. So we always say we complement the private sector. We don't compete with it. That's it for now. I'll cover questions later on if you like.
Just one question to make sure that everyone understands. It's not just for large companies, right?
So we cover anything from the small end of town to the large end of town. And I can give you, if you want examples, to tell you this how.
You do now, yeah.
You want me to do that now?
Go for it.
Sure. You sure you want to go through that?
That's
In terms of I'll use different ones. Again, covering in case of non-payment, this came through, a good example, this came through NZTE actually. Hawke's Bay Company, New Zealand Natural Juice. They were mentioned by the NZTE business development managers in a forum in Taiwan, and a big Taiwanese supermarket, Welcome Taiwan Group, wanted to transact with them, right? And it was like their order was something like a $50,000 sort of order to this supermarket chain in Taiwan. All looked good, but it's a $50,000 order. But this is a small New Zealand company in Hawke's Bay who couldn't afford not to get paid, right? So it was too small a transaction for the private sector insurers. The New Zealand Natural Juice Company couldn't afford to walk away from the transaction, so they need to get trade credit insurance. So we provide that trade credit insurance, underwrote a transaction for $50,000 for a shipment of New Zealand Natural Juice into this supermarket chain in Taiwan. So gave them the confidence to offer those repayment terms and transact and with a new buyer. Otherwise, they would have walked away, and that would have been something that somebody else would have picked up. So there's a premium to pay for those things, but if that's something that's you can build into the cost of your product and your contract, then if it helps you scale up, that's how it can work. So that was probably one of the smallest transactions we've done. So there's nothing too small and nothing that's too large as well. Both end of town, we can help the banks. What those might mention those letters of credit, where that's where you're getting the assurance from your buyer's bank. There's going to be some banks in that big wide world out there where ASB won't have appetite for, so we can provide our guarantee to ASB to confirm on those letters of credit, so we can actually cover that your buyer's bank as well and help the ASB. One of the things worth mentioning is sometimes having that, if you're a small exporter and you have you're struggling to get those bank facilities, and sometimes the best security you can have is your end buyer. So not in all cases, but generally you can use these trade credit insurance policies. They can be assigned to your bank, and they give you security to a bank for a bank to provide trade facilities. And so you talk to your bank manager on that one, but if you've got nothing else that trade, because that policy that's assigned to the bank, the security of them, and if the event the whole thing falls over, then the bank can rely on that policy being assigned to them and they get the proceeds from that. So think of that as a form of security as well, and you could get funds advanced on the back of that as well. So that's worth thinking about if you get in those situations where you're struggling to get a facility. Maybe having that trade for insurance is a possible way of doing that as well.
I think it's important to note too that whoever you're talking to with your banks around cash flow and trying to secure some overseas orders, etc., and you want to bank that. Don't get put off if the bank manager's saying, "Oh, it's too tricky, too hard, too much documentation." Just demand to speak to their trade finance representatives, because a lot of the frontline bankers, that's one of the 10 products they have to deal with every day. Sometimes this gets a bit washed up and gets forgotten in some respects. So just, if they're sort of like saying, if they're putting out the barrier saying it's too hard, too much documentation, it's going to take you too much time, just ask to see, look, can I talk to your trade finance? Every bank has them. So, and then you get down to the nitty gritty on how it works, and you sort of get introductions into the credit office and so on and so forth. So that's the best way of doing it. Any questions on the floor on any of those four speakers now? Don't be embarrassed if you haven't got a question, because Craig's got lots, so we're fine. You got any? Yeah, sure.
Yes, I have a question. So take the wine industry as an example, where it takes a lot of time and money to first grow the product and then create the product, bottle the product, etc., before you actually get paid at the other end. And now with supply chain disruption that we've seen in recent years, have you seen an uptake of export credit stepping in, or is that something that you tend to help with?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, and that's one thing I'm glad you asked that, because that whole issue of supply chain, which has been the last couple of years, and it's going to go on for a lot longer as well, has changed the way we think about things now. Because one of the things we didn't do so much before was that inventory financing. You need to get that stock on board just in time. That's going to add funding pressure to your business. That's the space we're looking at now, where you need to fund that inventory, because you need to have that here. You can't rely just in time anymore. So we're seeing a lot more requests of that, and that's something we are looking at now, because we have to, and the banks want that as well, because you can't rely on getting that stuff to market unless you put up the inventory first. So yes, we are, and that's something we'll it's almost changed our whole thinking process, because before we'd always want to be relying on where's the end sales. We need to look at that, how that inventory converts into end sales. It has to be a way, it has to be realised. So as long as we get some understanding of how that works and what that cycle is, absolutely, because we're seeing that all the time now. In fact, we've been called on quite heavily now in that space. And free shipment. So and that's all part of that supply chain as well. So if in that case, you've got to pay away your suppliers well in advance of getting paid, that's something we're looking at. Can I give an example? There's a company, there's an ASB example as well. See the way I give examples for you guys?
You're an example society.
Thank you. TH, there's a company, thanks Mike. There's a company called, used to be called Honey Lab. Okay, it's now called TRG, Natural Pharmaceuticals. They changed their name. And they do natural pharmaceutical products using like bee venom extracts. So they've been predominantly a research and development company. They've built themselves up. It's been break even, if not loss making for most of the years. But they finally secured a big contract with a provider in the US, and it was a significant contract. And it was a good chance for them to actually scale up as well. The problem they had is that their working capital cycle was so long. They had to source the bee venom from places like Georgia and various parts of Europe and New Zealand, manufacture it, go through all the product testing, ship it, and then they weren't getting paid for another. That's been shipped another 90 days after it arrived in the US, or even 180 days. So their working capital cycle was like 6 months, and that's a long time to carry yourself from a funding point of view. ASB didn't have comfort on this one, simply because it was concentration risk. They only really have one big buyer, right? So it was, and ASB's getting comfort on this now. But we looked at the contract. We saw that who the buyer was. We knew that that was you couldn't get better We knew that they'd done the hard yards. We knew they had supportive shareholders, but we got comfort around that, and we provided a loan guarantee to ASB for them to provide a facility for Honeylab or TRG Natural Pharmaceuticals, so they could fund that extended 6-month working capital cycle. So yeah, absolutely. If you've got those questions, come to us, because that's what we want to find out, particularly with wineries. You know, 'cause we know how that works, but it can be an industry. Yeah.
Just kind of related to what you were just saying, is the way you work with the customers kind of transaction specific? Because the examples you're using is per contract, and I'll tell you why in the context of where I am. We're a medical device company, and speaking of a long working capital cycle,
Yeah.
we use those chips that are nowhere to be found right now, and we have 8 of them per device. So we have to source them whenever we think that the market is right. And then we bring them in-house. All of our manufacturing is done in New Zealand, but our market is mainly US and Europe. So then we have to, like, after the whole R&D cycle going through that, it has to go back up there. We're a very small player, and our customers are huge US hospitals.
Yeah.
So we've got almost no leverage to negotiate payment terms. And by default, they're either 60, 90, or 120 days. So it's quite a long, but there is quite little per hospital. So the size of the contracts initially are small, especially in the absence of the funding, i.e. the reimbursement stuff that comes into the US healthcare. So how does that work? So if we were to, let's say, interact with you, would that be per transaction, overall per market?
We can, your ones, if yours could be like, it could be a case that we may need some sort of funding facility from your bank, but your bank might be thinking that's a little bit risky for us. We can provide guarantees when it comes to support. You might have a particular facility which might help you fund yourself through a number of years, right? We can support those type of facilities out to about 5 years. So it might be you go to your bank, you might say, look, we need this facility so we can fund our whole long working capital cycles. That might be a funding facility. So we can support a business. If we know their business is predominantly an export business, or even if it's not, even if you might be 50% domestic, 50% export, there's an export element there. So that's in scope. So that puts you in scope. And then we can support your bank if you to fund you through that period. We've got, I'll give you another example. We've got a firm up in, I can talk about it. It's actually one of their case studies, Global Metal Solutions. You know, we funded they had a situation where they needed to import a big bit of equipment to open up a yard in Papakura, a shredding machine. It was like an $8 million sort of purchase, right? And that got beyond the risk appetite of their bank. We got comfort around who they were, their track record. We look at the technical, the managerial, and the financial wherewithal. See if the whole thing makes sense. We supported them for a 3-year asset finance facility, and it was purely about capex. But it's because that firm was predominantly export. Everything they do is about export. So whatever facility they need was in scope for us. So it could be the same for you as well. It might be more on that funding side rather than
But it doesn't have to be transaction specific. It could be an export program, which could, for some businesses, it could be an entire business. But for others, it might be just a part.
The trade finance product can cover that longer term contract, and it just goes up, payment done, down, in, starts again, up, down. You don't have to look at and renegotiate it every time. Is that correct? It can be across a whole range of different short-term projects.
So it comes back to telling the story.
Exactly.
And it's a joint conversation. More often than not, well, it's a tri-party conversation. It's not just.
Yeah. So when we offer, say, the guarantees to the banks to provide those facilities, it's a joint application. So the exporter, you go through your normal process with ASB or whoever your bank might be, and then the bank comes to us and say, okay, this is how much we're prepared to do. Here's the gap. Here's what we want you to do in New Zealand export credit. Or they might say, we believe in these guys, but we want you to do 100% of it. That could happen as well. So the bank and you as the exporter would be joint applicants. You go through your normal process, the bank comes to us and say, this is the gap. This is the piece we want you to fill. It could be the whole lot as well.
Any questions from the floor?
A really hard question. Obviously everything comes at a cost, like you say, for using these types of facilities. What should we be budgeting for if we should go down the route of using that type of facility for export transactions? It's like nobody wants to answer that. Round numbers. Okay.
Well, it's just maths, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, so it's whatever. So to answer some of that is what currency you're looking to fund it.
Yeah. So for instance,
so New Zealand, for example, New Zealand interest rates are higher than Japanese interest rates, for example. But it's got to be a natural fit with the market that you're going to. But you can fund in the currency receivable. It's that interest rate plus multiplied by the number of days that it's out the door, and that's your cost of funding. Now you can either price that into what you can work that all the way back to the unit price that you're selling for, incorporated it that way, or and absorb it within the business. So I'm not doing the maths out loud, but depending on the amount that you're borrowing, if it's $1 million at 5% for 180 days, it's whatever that comes to. It's a bit early in the morning for my head to get around that one. But I was 10%, it's a whole lot easier. But it's the key thing is don't think that as an exporter you need to absorb the cost. You can price it and incorporate it in a unit price and look to recover it that way. And there's nothing scary about that because there's a big world out there and they're used to, the lesser developed countries or the higher risk countries, they're used to paying for it. Sitting here, we used to work for a really large business. That's how they do business with certain parts of the world. Here's the price, here's your price. And by the way, this is how you're going to pay for it, or not.
Yeah, I can add to that too. Like with the trade credit insurance, the pricing depends on three factors. One is who's your buyer? Is it an SME or is it a corporate? Different risk profile. What's the country? Is it like Australia or Afghanistan? Big students up. I'm not going to do anything in Afghanistan, but anyway. And the third factor would be what's the duration of the risk? Are you looking for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days? So if there's trade for insurance as a product you're thinking of, what we can do is you can if you're thinking how do I price this into my end contract, just let us know just all those three things, and we can give you a indicative quote and say this is what your premium will be, and so we can do that quite easily. Actually, we just do a risk rating on that. With the guaranteed product, which we provide to the banks, so there's two factors. One is the cost of funds, which Mike just talked about, but there's also a risk premium that we charge as well. So you've got to think of two elements: their cost of funds and their net interest margin, plus the risk premium. So we charge risk premium for everything too, because we can't. Nothing's for free, and also we have to because otherwise it's seen as a subsidy. You can't do these things. This is a appropriate risk premium. But we just cover the risk and our own costs, so there's no profit element there. So in terms of a guarantee, look, we used to say, we used to have a range. So think of the bank's cost of funds plus our premium, usually something like, it's probably hovering around about another 4% per annum on the facility amount as a general rule. It can, in fact, it could be less, so anything from that 0 to 4% range. If you're good company, so the guarantees, because we're taking the risk on you as the exporter, that's what we're underwriting. Think of that range 0 to 4%. If you're good, there might be around about 3, and then outside 4%. But it can go up to 6%. So maybe think 0 to 6%, somewhere around about 3 or 4% will be on average our premium, and that's on top. It's not the cheapest way to fund yourself, because you're probably talking 4%, and the bank's bring another 4% cost of funds. It's probably about 8 or 9% all up cost of funds. But as long as there's some way you can actually pass that on. But it's worth thinking about it. It might be 8% cost of funds, but it means if that enables you to scale up, fulfill a contract otherwise would have gone walking, then it might be worth your while. And then maybe next time you don't need us. It's going to be cheaper to cut us out of the whole equation, obviously. but if you scale up and get into that contract, then give you a price worth paying.
Yeah, and maybe a dose of realism with that as well, though, without being too harsh, is that if that allows you to fulfill an order that's going to generate 50 to 100% gross profit, is a deal worth doing or not worth doing? That's the way to look at it until you get a certain size and scale that you can self-fund. It's a really important part. Phil touched on the concept of nothing for free, but it's not even so much about that. If you don't have access to the capital to do it yourself, you need to find a source somewhere. And banks will be the cheapest source of finance, irrespective of what happens with the OCR rate and the likes. But look at the cost of being able to execute and sell and grow your business to where you want it to be versus not doing a deal.
So let's jump back into from the efficiency of finance to the efficiency of data and digital technology. Craig, you have a few questions. Lucia was talking.
I was fascinated by how generous you two are. I was afraid, Jane, you weren't going to get an answer out of that.
I know, I was waiting for the actual.
So somewhere between 0 and 9.
It took a long time to get there, but eventually there was a number to work with.
And I guess the time to engage is free.
Yeah.
Then you can map out.
I do have lots of questions for Lucia. One of the questions I've got of you two, we see a lot of, we do a lot of work with businesses, on their balance sheet and on their P&Ls, on their cash flows. We tend not to do so much at a pre-P&L level, pricing strategies, price modelling and that sort of thing. With that question, do you sit down and help small businesses with pricing strategy and pricing modelling scenarios at all or not?
Yep, can do.
You can.
Yep.
It's just it's something that we don't see a lot of, and I think it's an oft overlooked capability, skill, especially when you start going internationally, and suddenly you're hit with these extra costs at a product level, and suddenly your revenue line is not what you thought it was, because actually the cost to serve the market is a whole lot more expensive than you thought, and you've both got all this benchmark information from peer businesses and peer sectors and industries and that sort of thing. Can you just take that and overlay it and say, hey, you should be at this level. You might be able to use and negotiate these kind of terms because we're seeing those built into other sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul touched on, trade finance specialists within a bank.
Yeah,
that's your best source. Absolutely. Able to step through the various components.
You guys are doing some cash flow workshops, eh?
Yeah, our investment team does. So yeah, within that really simple model of build your capability and go to export, the operating model here is we do trade and we do investment, and our investment team will help businesses do cash flow modelling and that sort of stuff. We try not to sell our own capabilities and our own talent and experience. But in this case, and through COVID and through some of the Cyclone Gabrielle upsets, we have got individuals that will help cash flow modelling. Yeah. It's probably better coming from the banks than it is from us, especially where you've got peer.
It's quite different, NZ, on just speaking from what we've gone through the last couple of years. So having it, in essence, removed from the bank and going through those discussions. I know we've done that in this for the last year with, do you have external investment to avoid using bank, or do you go down that bank route and looking at the pros and cons of both of those and what works best for your cash flow and what is actually the right thing for your business for its growth? Yes. Sometimes it's good to have that removed from a financial institution as well and take it more as a business growth side.
So yes, we do help you with those scenarios and even preparing things like documentation to go and try to find investors and present your business in the best possible light. And I think that they're great growth strategies. I came out of the M&A industry before I came here. I would go back to Mike's comment, which is the bank's the cheapest source of money that you can get. investors are going to cost you a whole lot more and probably cost you part of your business. And I think that's a very relevant way to grow. We were just talking in the lounge beforehand about the strategies to grow and how you'll probably get more return by sometimes bringing in corporate venture or venture capitalists. Absolutely. I think in the situation that we're talking about here, sometimes the bank's still the cheapest source of capital that you're going to get, and you're not going to lose your equity in the business. But yes, we do that, as well as the cash flow, as well as setting you up with banks and with trade credit to make sure that you can get the best from a current cash cycle perspective. Yep.
And power the efficiency. TradeWindow, you had a few questions on maybe the platform.
Yeah, it was interesting. It's interesting. I was sitting thinking about those kids that are out in the lounge, because there is a teacher strike on today, so it's good to see kids in the building. But if they were sitting here in the audience, they'd say, adds cost, strips cost, adds risk, reduces risk. Right? It's very simple. Right? Just,
Yes.
Cost in, cost out, risk in, risk out. Yeah, easy.
Yep. That's true.
The question, is the digitisation piece, right? Digitisation saves a lot of money, right? When you strip out time, the cost of time, the cost of people, and that sort of thing. So, you spoke about 20 different documents and thousands of different data points. When you translate those 20 documents and those different data points into people, those costs that we have to look at every day in the business, how many can you make is there a formula for saying that the work that you do equals this many people in a business?
There is no formula for that, because it involves in digitalizing a export process, for example. It's not only the data entry that you are looking at.
Okay.
It's much more than that. It's about managing, and this is practically probably the one of the best advantages, is that you can manage the requirements much easier through a digitalized system. So you have at your fingertips all the time the latest information and set up if you want to go in a new market without having to check for all those requirements every time that you are issuing a new transaction or you are creating a new transaction. In terms of how much people you can, how much time is saved, there is no specifically formula, but definitely companies do see over time decrease in the number of people required, increase in the productivity, and most of it increase in the accuracy of data, which is a very big cost saving at the end of the day, because every error will cost you money to fix it, to redo, and so on. So it's just if you do a measurement over time, you can do that as well. And I have examples of my previous working place where that implementation of a digital solution create a lot of productivity over time. So you will be able to produce thousands of sets of documents, tens of thousands of sets of documents with a minimal number of people.
Yeah.
But that means, integration of the system.
Maybe I'll
It's just a
chair, and be brave.
Yeah.
Seeing a big thirst for numbers in the audience today. So it can be up to 60%.
Right.
In terms of savings, so productivity. And that's a number that resonates with one of New Zealand's largest meat exporters. So guess what Lucia was trying to say is you don't know what level that will be, depending on the size of the business.
Yeah.
60% on a small operation may not be a lot, but it is quite significant.
Yeah, that is good.
And it's something worth pursuing, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Can sort of own operators here probably and people in small and medium businesses, when running a training academy, what do they need to learn? What's the main things that they have to get their head around in learning how to use the system?
So practically being a software provider, we are providing training for our software so that will teach people exactly how to use the functionality of the system, and not only that, how to implement the best practice when they are setting up their process, and how this particular system can help them in create the best practice in their activity. But a part of that, we are helping the exporters with the industry knowledge, like Mike was discussing about the payment terms that are the best, which payment terms will be the best to use in your organization, or how are you going to go about. And that's part of the training that we are providing, as well as, basic information as what Incoterms are and how they should be used in an export documentation, in an export process. That type of information we are providing to the exporters.
It's not just export documentation, it's traceability, source of origin, so
Exactly,
the consumer can see where it's come from. That's right.
It's more about the export process in terms of managing the documentation part of it, the data movement. But yes, we do talk about, because our system is capable of interacting with other entities in the ecosystem, like customs and MPI. So we do talk about all these requirements and information that are needed to get to that point. As well, we are a provider of a certificate of origin. We have a software that issue certificates of origin, including the free trade agreements, the FTAs of the certificates. So we have training in that respect as well. We train people what exactly our software does, and more than that, what a certificate of origin is, what the role of each document is, and how the documents are, flowing in a transaction. So it's practically all around.
I was going to ask you about that, because we're working with a business at the moment who has been surprised, I suppose, by some feedback from the market that the products that they're selling into the market haven't got the necessary regulatory approvals to actually be in that market.
Absolutely.
So does the TradeWindow system link up to the OMARs and the MPI export certification regulations?
The system as such does not link with the OMAR, because OMAR is a beast, but what the system has the capability of capturing those requirements exactly for the country that you deal with, in that way that when, just give an example, when you have you export dairy products to China, you're required to issue a health certificate for that product to China. That certificate needs to be issued by MPI, being the authorized authority in the country to issue that certificate, and that certificate needs to contain the clauses that the both country agreed upon.
Yeah.
So all that information will be available in your product. You will get to the point, and I can show you, when you are going to be able to choose exactly which type of clause need to be answered on the certificate for your specific product based on the origin of the ingredients of your products. And that will be the request that you automatically will send to MPI from the system without having to go on their website and pick it up. What do you need to do? Because it will be set up on the system. And so the effort is making sure that the master data, as we call it, is set up properly from the beginning. And then you just flow to the transactions once that are set up.
And so if I was doing a setup with you and I didn't have that piece of information, then that in itself is a check and balance on the fact that I now need to go away and do some work on trying to we can help until a certain point the exporter, but most of the time the exporter do kind of, they will have an industry. We do have a fair amount of knowledge about each industry, so we can help with that. But at the end of the day, the responsibility of managing that master data will be on the exporter because it's their system. But yeah. do you keep up with the changing regulations?
And I think that's the $1 million question, because the changes are happening all the time, and they have made various reasons for every changes. Every country will implement all sorts of changes from today to tomorrow, and you need to comply with that. So it's just knowing your market, and because we are serving such a big number of exporters, we do kind of have knowledge about lots of regulations that are changing on various countries. And, you know, if, just give you an example, if Egypt come up with a new requirement and a specific tax number of the partner needs to be in a specific field, our company, our software will have to accommodate that.
Yeah.
So we are setting that up in the system. We are modifying our system to make sure that does comply with the latest requirements in terms of market access, in terms of clearance at the destination country. So that's how we are capturing our information up to date.
I'm just conscious of time. There's a question here. We'll get to a question in a minute. Just conscious of time. I know we've been started a little bit late because of the traffic and issues. So we'll just carry on a few more minutes, and then we'll. If who wants to stay and
There was another
question.
question.
Who wants to stay and see a demonstration, you can, or you can get back to work. I'll just take your question first.
Thanks so much. Two questions actually. One is a quick one, and is the information that is available sector specific in terms of markets? Like, for example, is it different for food and beverage compared to
Yes, definitely it is different from sector to sector, because various products will require various certification, various specific documents that you need to issue, and as well there will be differences on the markets that you are going with. The same product might have different requirements on various markets. And we do, again, the software does have the ability to capture all those specifics based on the country and the country that you are dealing with. And our systems is set up on the pretty much on the industry that you are working on. So if you are working on meat, the system that you are going to use will have those setups related to meat, and so on for other industries.
Thank you. Second question, there's suggestion around the savings, and you mentioned up to 60%. Is that correlated with the size of the transactions or the number of transactions?
It's about the number of transactions at the end of the day, but the size as well, because what a system, automated system like this can do is, once that you set up the information, and more than that, you link the system with one of your internal system, an ERP system, the information flows to the transaction. So that key in of information is not required anymore. And more than that, the system does link with the third parties, participants in the transaction, which is, like I said, MPI, customs, shipping instruction, shipping companies, and so on. So therefore, your data flows to these parties. So you don't have to do that. That time-consuming correspondence or checking the data, and once that you have it from the source, data is accurate. No human intervention, no manipulation of data. So you have all the tools to make sure that the data is just flowing from one place to another. So that will on both sides, either on transaction and the number of transactions. You know, it's easy to manage a big number of transactions. Plus, that as I will show you, we have means to manage the deadlines and the due dates that you need to look through when you are, executing a transaction.
Lucia, could I just throw in a comment, please? I was lucky enough to actually work on preparing a couple of case studies for TradeWindow, and just laid my hands on some of the actual data about some of the benefits and savings, and it may be of interest. Just and the names are on the public record, but Ansco, one of the big meat companies, they found a 63% productivity increase, and For an average transaction, preparing the documents, it reduced from 45 minutes to 11 minutes per transaction. And they found that they were getting about 40 to 50 fewer emails per day relating to the trade going across the border. And with the certificates of origin, reduced it from 24 hours to 20 seconds, which was quite a big saving. And another meat company, Greenlee, which is headquartered near Hamilton, found that they got 9 times fewer errors in their export documentation, a 37% reduction in courier costs from less of the paperwork.
And that's a good saving. And you know, you don't need to archive physical paper anymore. You can archive the data in the system. So
and the final stat from them, not such a great productivity increase as the other company, but still finding a 33% increase in day-to-day efficiency of their export operations.
So Jane, net benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
60% saving on this side of the table for I think they said 3.5% cost increase on the other end of the table. So net, we're looking pretty good this morning.
Fishery screen.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Is there a way you can share that?
Certainly, but yeah, I could perhaps provide to whoever's chairing just a couple of these. Well, there's about half a dozen case studies with actual examples and data in them actually from various very real New Zealand companies.
That's part of the value proposition.
Yes.
To why it makes sense to take this step.
So to wrap this up, I'll ask the panel in a minute to give a couple of final tips, I suppose, the last kind of, fountains of knowledge exuding out that you're going to take away. Specifically on the topic, how you enter new markets. So think about entering a new market, what's the key thing that would be a practical tip to take away for the audience. Before I do that, just want to check there's no more questions. Can take one more if anyone's got a question from the audience. Just gives these guys time to think about their tip.
I was actually curious, Craig, you mentioned overseas market access issues where someone exported to a country, realised that the product wasn't viable and then couldn't be sold. Can you explain more around who that company was potentially, or the market that they were going to, and the issue that they faced in terms of getting that product on the shelf?
I won't do any names, but I'll give you two examples, which kind of anonymises the situation. So one business we're dealing with is selling an ingredient, and are selling it to selling B2B into a market, and it's what that market, or it's what that buyer in the market is doing with the ingredient for the final product that is causing it to be misrepresented in the market. So I think that from a OMAR perspective, they are legal, but it's how it's been represented in the market that might be running foul to local regulations. Another market at the moment, and this one is America, they have been selling very effectively in the market, but the FDA has changed the regulations and changed the requirements, and they've been caught out with a shift in regulations. And so what they thought was freedom to sell, freedom to operate, has now become a constraint. And it's just a change in regulations, what we sometimes at NZTE call non-tariff barriers. The geopolitics, the pressure that comes on markets to protect their own before others coming in has shifted, and they've been caught out in a strange way, because they didn't, as I said at the start, they didn't have their own people on the ground. So they've shipped the product, and they're at risk of having to take it back because they can't overlabel change it. So it's a
how do they find out? How do they?
It's usually too late. It's usually a distributor or an agent that has gone to put the product on shelf or something and been caught out by a buyer or retailer or someone else saying this product isn't too standard.
You can help them with that. Any more questions? So following this, before we get these last little tips, Lucia is going to do a run through the demonstration. You can do that. It's in here. Yeah. Okay. Right here. Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to stay around for that? Just loiter in this area, and Lucia will take you through that. I think it's still some medium warm coffee out there, and some food. If you want to hang around for that, or just if you really want to go back to work, go back to work. So lastly, run through the panel. Start with Craig. What's your top? So no, good point. I'll start with Phil. Because Phil should always be first.
It's a systemic issue.
be a doozy of a point.
No, it's not.
What's your market positioning? At the end of the queue, delivery.
I think you're right about that, actually. What my thing is, know your buyer, manage your buyer risk, and if particularly if you're going into new markets, and if you don't know that buyer and you can't afford to take that risk, give us a call. We don't mind actually just doing that, being that other second set of eyes for you, right? We've had situations where somebody's had a contract that seemed too good to be true with a buyer in a far-flung location, and we did our due diligence, and the buyer didn't even exist, you know. And even if you've got a long-standing relationship with your buyer, the way the world's going now, they may have been good 2 years ago, right? And their whole financial situation might have deteriorated. You don't know what sort of perilous state they might be in, and it might be worth thinking about underwriting some of that buyer risk, and that's where we come in.
For me, probably two things. So spend more time on your business rather than in it. And by that I mean not on your own. So if you step outside your business, have a think about it, where you're going strategically, and talk to others. So whether it's NZTE, whether it's your banker, the more people you talk to, the easier you'll find it, the quicker you'll find a solution to your challenges. They're not insurmountable. And then the second one is really embrace digitalisation. That's the whole purpose of why ASB was involved in co-founding and co-funding TradeWindow. But it is something that is not necessarily just in the future. It's here, it's now, it's real. And digitalisation will deliver some efficiencies to your business and make the world of exporting easier. Sorry about that.
Yes, my line. So I think that it is important when you are prospecting a new market to access that market, to make sure that you do have means to comply with rules and regulations, errors, and not knowing exactly the requirements could be very, very costly. So that's why digitalization is a good tool to have to help you with that.
I like the line, it's just math. Unfortunately, for all those people that think right brain rather than left brain, it's not just math, it's about probability as well. So there we go, we've fixed both sides up. But geez, if you can get 60% cost savings out of probability, out of digitization, then that starts to pay for a lot of other things, including, what we'd say is do your assessments, do your homework, validate the markets, and probably more importantly, listening to this, very few of us are unique and new. Someone has trodden that path before us. And so I think that what we've heard is that there's a bunch of peer experiences that actually all you need to do is ask a question and try to find out about, because someone will have been there before you and will happily share what the success factors or what the baselines should be. And then you can work out where you are and what you need to do to improve on that.
Great, thank you very much. A little comment or question from the floor here?
Yeah, probably a little bit of a left field question potentially. So I'm a customer manager working with a range of food and beverage businesses, but also consumer goods, sorry. And one issue that I come across a lot is that businesses will create a beautiful product, but then basically just sell it FOB and rely on distributors in market to then build a brand and sell the product. And going back to the wine industry, an example might be somebody creates a beautiful wine, puts that in a container, goodbye to that wine, entering it into various shows, that wine becomes the best Syrah in the world. They have already sold that wine, that is out of their hands. Do you see, is there an opportunity for the bank to come in or for Export Credit Office to come in and look at potential other business models, how we can stop being an ingredient supplier in effect by growing this amazing product, sticking it and then letting someone else take the cream, and how might we help companies to realise that margin that they're leaving on the table?
A good example from our point of view is just in the same kind of industry as We've sponsored Hono the last 3 years, and we've seen now another 3 years. So, and that's all about innovation in the food and fibre sector. And it's more of just moving up the value chain rather than just exporting containers of meat, containers of other food. It's just that more value add. So all the thinking with the private sector and the public sector is around, Craig's involved, a lot of the stuff is, how you take that innovation, how you create new business models. And we're looking for that all the time. And then once you do that, then it's up to people like us and banks, for example, and software platforms is then how do you make that more efficient? How do you fund that? How do you put the capital behind it to accelerate it? So short answer is yes, it's always looking at different models because we have to, as a small exporting nation at the bottom of the world, we just have to be highly innovative. I think that's just one example that we can all work together on. Craig's involved into Hono, I am.
Well, I might jump in there actually. An interesting thing you can do is actually convert, for your example, wine bottles. You can convert them all into digital assets. So if you're selling to a distributor and you want to get in touch with the end consumer, you can uniquely identify every wine bottle that you sell and control the messaging that you get to that customer, but also what you receive back from them as well. We work with some companies who were distributing to the US and then, to China, who was reselling to the US. And so what they were trying to do was get in touch with the end consumer to create a direct channel to market in the US. So the idea was to uniquely identify all of the products that were going to China so that when they ended up in the US, they could control whatever was happening directly to that end consumer.
That's very cool. Well, is that by bottle?
It was, down to the unique bottles.
Is that built into TradeWindow platform?
It works alongside the platform that the chair was talking about.
Sure. All comes from the same stable. Well,
Jeez. There you go. We all learn something every day.
We have a suite of products, of software that can help the whole, process, whole trade process, supply chain.
Oh, cool.
not a
There you
gym
go.
trade.
Shit, old dogs, new tricks every day.
Could be an NFT.
Yeah, let's go there. NFTs, AIs and VRs.
Okay, let's wrap that up. They're up, yeah, good. Okay, probably gonna get out of here by So just thank the audience for being here, thank the panel for being here, thank everyone for being here. And if you want to hang around and see the chair, just come here, otherwise get outside. Thanks very much. Thank you.
We're saving money, changing. Oh, has it?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.